So, my presentation is mental health of CSUF honors students during the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, and my PI is Professor Lisa Mori. She's in the psychology department at CSUF. So, the objective of the study basically was for me to look at honors college students at CSUF to see how COVID-19 has affected their mental health. And so, I wanted to look at this particular group in terms of their depression, stress, anxiety, coping mechanisms, and social support. Um, yes, so that is the objective of the study. And now, kind of just to talk about why the honors population. Surprisingly, when I did a lot of background research to choose between biology student or science students versus honors students, there was a lack of research that was found for honors students. And I figured, well, if I am doing an honors project, let me like try to incorporate the honors population because there's a lack of research. And I felt like that was very fitting, especially for submitting an honors project. And furthermore, just kind of looking at the honors project and honors population throughout the study, I can kind of use my study and help professionals at CSUF and like the honors director, like Dr. Perez, to kind of see other ways of how we can help honor students during kind of this COVID-19 time, but also beyond, because they are such an underrepresented group. So, kind of looking at my hypotheses now, I focused on five major hypotheses. The first four were looking at depression, stress, and anxiety within different groups. So the first one being depression, stress, and anxiety between females and males, and it was predicted females would report higher levels. The second one was low income versus high income, and it was the prediction I made was that low income participants would have higher levels of depression, stress, and anxiety. And then my third one was looking at non-white versus white participants, and that non-whites would report higher levels. Hypothesis four was looking at low versus high social support. And I predicted that those with low social support would have higher levels of depression, stress, and anxiety. And then my fifth hypothesis was a little bit different than the others. This one was looking at coping mechanisms between males versus females. And I predicted that females would indicate higher use of emotional support and positive reframing, while males would look at self distraction and substance abuse as their primary coping mechanisms. So, those are the five hypotheses I chose to look at throughout the study. Now, the methods and materials, this was pretty, I guess, simple. What I did was I firstly looked at which studies, or not studies, but which pre-made surveys I wanted to use, scales, that's the word, scales, I wanted to use. And so I chose the DASS 21, which is depression, anxiety, and stress. And then to look at the coping mechanisms, I use the brief cope. In order to kind of look at academic stress in particular, I use the perception of academic stress scale. And then to look at low social support and high social support, I use the multidimensional scale of perceived social support. I then kind of culminated all that and made my own Qualtrics survey, which I then distributed to the honors undergraduates. And then I used SPSS with my mentor, and we did the statistical analysis. And we used ANOVA when we were doing statistical analysis. So mental health in college students, this kind of goes more into the background, but college students are typically very constantly under academic stress. Some kind of statistics I found that I thought were important to highlight are that one third are typically anxious or tense, one fifth are typically tired without any apparent reason, and 20 to 25% suffer from psychological distress. So already looking at it, college students are being very affected with their mental health. So if we look at honor students, which there weren't statistics specifically on honor students, you can imagine them being at a higher in a more demanding environment would cause them to suffer more. COVID-19 and psychological impact. So typically, as COVID-19 has progressed, it's minority groups that suffer the most with negative psychological impacts. And just in general, minority groups have had an increase in their anxiety from 2008 to 2016. And that has also affected their education as well. So, kind of not only just in the COVID-19 realm, but also just in general, it has affected a lot of minority groups. COVID-19 and remote instruction. So this is also another thing now that classes are online via Zoom, Discord, whatever way professors choose to teach their classes. It has caused generalized anxiety disorder and major depression to increase during this kind of shift. It's negatively impacted mental health, and it's also just in general caused lack of focus, a hard time learning because we're not in the in-person setting, we're not getting hands-on learning, especially for those in science majors who require labs. The labs were taken away for those students, so it's just been an all-around adjustment to a new way of learning, which causes a lot of anxiety. And then economic impact, COVID-19 plays a very large part in economic impact from day-to-day lives, people losing jobs, perhaps reduced wages, having food insecurity, housing insecurity. So there's all kinds of things that people all around are struggling with. And then finances, so not being able to get the basic necessities that you may need on a day-to-day basis. And then there's also a digital divide, which I talk about in my introduction, but basically, students may not have the resources such as computers, Wi-Fi, lack of equipment to access their classes. So this is another thing that's kind of been hindering people and causing anxiety, perhaps depression, and it can increasing stress for particularly those in low-income areas or underserved areas. So it affects those in the minority groups more so than anyone else. And then social distancing is another key factor in this. It's led to loneliness, not being able to see friends or family, the whole 6 feet social distancing. It's caused a lot of reduced social support. It's increased anxiety and depression and stress because there's no constant human face to face interaction, which is a lot of how us as humans we thrive because we're such people. Um, so that's how social distancing has kind of affected um, mental health as well. Now, so I talked about how I distributed the survey and we collected the data. My mentor and I, we then did we used SPSS and we did ANOVA to look at kind of the means and which hypotheses were supported and were not supported. And so hypothesis one, it was kind of shown that females have higher rates of stress, anxiety, and depression than men, which as I predicted, so my prediction was true, but it was only significant in stress. It was not significant in anxiety and depression. So it was partly supported. Hypothesis two, my prediction again was correct with lower incomes having higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, but it was only significant in the stress and depression group. It was not significant within anxiety. And then hypothesis three, this one kind of threw me a little bit because it's not what I predicted. In fact, it was the opposite. So white participants had higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression as compared to non-whites. And it was overall, it was not significant in any of the categories. So it didn't support my hypothesis. And then hypothesis four, my prediction of lower social support was in fact supported, but it was only supported for depression. It was not significant in stress and anxiety. And then hypothesis five, so this one I had predicted females would have higher levels of positive reframing and emotional support. Although females were higher, there was no significant difference in positive reframing and emotional support between males and females. And then my prediction of males preferred coping mechanisms such as substance abuse and self distraction. What they were not supported, and it actually was shown that women showed to use substance abuse more. There was no significant difference in substance abuse, but there was a significant difference in self-distraction between males and females. And then kind of just going on to the discussion to kind of conclude and put a little bow onto what I've talked about is that hypothesis one, what other studies that I looked at and kind of referred to in my discussion showed that women had higher levels of depression, stress, anxiety, and this could be due to a various number of factors. Could be due to gender norms, environmental norms, etc. So it was consistent with my findings. Hypothesis two, again, I found other data that was consistent with my findings that low income groups were at higher risks. And this could have been due to a lot of food, housing, income, work type things that were a stress for them. Hypothesis three, my findings were in fact inconsistent. Other findings have shown the low that non-whites and other minority groups such as LGBTQ, they're the ones that have higher levels of depression, stress, and anxiety. But again, this could be due to the fact that my participants, I only had about 115 participants, so this could be due to the small pool, making maybe more white participants than non-white. So that could be what caused this issue, as well as the fact that maybe my study is showing that white students are struggling to the same degree as non-whites, so that could be another thing to look at. And then hypothesis four, my studies were consistent. Other studies have shown low social support tends to lead to higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. But the good thing in this is that many students, in at least in other studies I looked at, have been seeking more psychological help and mental health resources. So kind of, I guess COVID-19 led to a good thing in that sense, where because they weren't able to physically see their social support people, they were accessing other forms of help. And then hypothesis five, um, other kind of studies looked at the fact that both genders have been using more positive coping mechanisms rather than negative coping mechanisms. So it's very good that emotional support and positive reframing were a little bit higher than all other ones. But yeah, that is the entirety of my senior honors project and kind of what I learned from it. And I also just kind of concluding, if I was to take this on a bigger scale to kind of get more accurate findings, my thought was I could send out my survey to all the honors programs at the CSUs and get more accurate data from the CSUs as a whole to see how COVID-19 has affected them. But overall, it was interesting kind of learning what I did learn through the process.